everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Black Sand Journals. I'm your host, Seti Matua. Appreciate you joining us and spending your time with us for a brief moment as we talk to one of my very good friends, someone I admire and look up to. That's Doug Fiefia. Doug, as many of you know, here in the state of Utah, was recently, um, how would you say that? Appointed, or it's not an appointment, right? Elected.
Yeah.
You were elected to Congress here in the state of Utah from District 48. You ran under the Republican ticket. Great man of God, great community servant, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today, Doug. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
That's always an interesting question. If there's a way to describe me is I'm a husband and a father who is trying to do his best, and uh, I think all at the same time trying to honor God and build the kingdom of God in my small part of the vineyard. The other things, the accolades, the education, although it's important, isn't um, something I really hold as important as just being a husband and father. And so that's me at the crux of everything. That's who I am, and a child of God. And I was born and raised in Utah. My parents came from the islands of Tonga in the late '70s, and they chased the American dream. And man, to go back and tell my parents then that one day their son would be writing laws for this state that they
Yeah,
lived in is is pretty cool. And so I'm honored to carry the title of being a representative in the Utah Legislature. And I think the hopes of what I'm doing now is just trying to make a difference and leave the world a better place for our kids and future generations. And so that's a little bit about me, but we can dive more into my story and my background as we kind of dive into the conversation.
beautiful. Thank you, Doug. Um, just maybe a little more background for the listening audience so that they're a little more familiar. You mentioned born and raised in the state of Utah. Um, uh, if I recall correctly, Bingham High graduate, and you were on scholarship at Utah State in Logan. And so this is, I'm leading, what I'm leading to is this really isn't your first run as, um, kind of in a position where you were elected to serve the people, because you served in some capacity at Utah State too, weren't you? Did you?
Yeah, yeah, I was a student body president,
Yeah.
which was an I think really the opening and kind of the introduction into kind of the political world. Because even though it's like, oh, it's just a university, you're student body president. One cool thing, and I think most universities in Utah, they give quite a bit of power and say to students, which is I think is very very important, and especially the student body president. So I oversaw 30,000 students statewide because Utah State is not just in Logan, it's a land grant university. So there's campuses throughout Utah. The whole land grant and the idea of that is that it serves every county county within the state. And so
Yep.
there's 30,000 students statewide. And I had the opportunity to oversee one, I don't know, 1.1, $1.2 million budget that I had full say over, and hired a bunch of employees that worked for the university, hired a bunch of student employees. And then I think the coolest part about it is I was actually a voting member of the board of trustees at Utah State. And so
Wow.
every major decision that the
It's
university
crazy.
makes goes to the board of trustees. And I wasn't just a sitting member, a non-voting member. I actually had a vote. And so when it came to the big decisions, a lot of people would come and lobby me and try to sway my vote. And so it was cool to see
Yeah.
that students had a say at the table. And that was kind of my real introduction into politics, how things work, how state funding works. And I had the opportunity to go to the Capitol and lobby on behalf of Utah State to ask for funding, ask for support for, a new building that we were asking for the state to help support and fund. And so I got a little bit of the taste of how does this whole process work? How are things funded? How does government work in Utah? And I think that was the experience of saying, man, I did it as a student. We were able to get some cool things done. I think eventually at some point I could actually do this for real in the state legislature.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I had no clue that happened. First of all, that when you talk about the land grants, so which makes sense because state universities, just like they do in California, you have an opportunity to go to a state-run university throughout the state of California, and I was not aware of that here in the state of Utah, so it makes sense. So thanks for explaining that, and that's kind of why I asked the question about your position at Utah State, and was not aware of the amount of authority and power that you wield as student body president there. So thanks for explaining that as well. It's important to be fiscally sound, isn't it?
Absolutely. Especially in Utah, we care, I guess, more than most
Yeah,
states.
yeah,
Um, and people care about their money, right? It's how we function as a society. We trade dollars for services and for products. And when you think about hard-earned dollars and Utahns and Americans working to support their families, well, a portion of that always goes towards taxes. And so the government should be fiscally responsible with the hard-earned dollars that you and I and everyone else that are tax-paying citizens
yeah,
have worked to provide. And so when I vote on things that affect the taxpayer and it may increase taxes, I really try to think about every stage of my life. When I was a poor college student, when we were a
right.
young couple living on food stamps and had two young
Yeah,
kids, and then maybe a young professional and starting out my career and thinking about how this would affect me. And so though I'm not at the end of my career, I've seen different phases, and I try to think about everyone at different stages, knowing that it's going to affect all levels, and hopefully, even we made a cut to income tax, and some people were saying, "Why did you guys do that? It was so small. It was $40.
right.
You're gonna save us $40?" And I said, "That's a box of diapers. Like,
Yeah,
you may just roll your eyes at it and say, 'What a waste of a income tax cut.' But to the mom who's struggling, who needs to
yeah,
pay for diapers,
right.
that's a world of difference, and we can't forget, the least among us, um,
Yeah.
to just say this is
Or
not
to
it.
the struggling student, 40
Yeah,
bucks is a lot of money.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. How does that, I mean, you're living the American dream, standing in a position of power here in the state of Utah. And how does growing up in an immigrant household, parents immigrated from Tonga for a better opportunity for their children, does living um, in that household, did it help you understand the importance of being fiscally responsible?
Absolutely, because I can go back to vivid memories where my parents, one, there were times where we did not have dinner. Now, the second was even later in life when I was older to understand, my parents would sit us down and say, "We have only enough for rent or tithing, and we have to choose, and we want you guys to realize the decision we're making as parents is that we are only going to pay our tithing and putting our trust in the Lord and seeing what comes of it. And we if things don't work out with our home, and we just want you to know that this is the decision we made, and want you guys to know as our kids." And so we had those hard conversations, and I even remember as a kid thinking, why wouldn't we just pay our rent? Like, just do it. Like, this doesn't make
Yeah.
sense. And
Do the
as
easy thing.
yeah, just maybe God has already blessed us with the rent money because he wants us to pay rent.
Yeah.
And having
Yeah.
a lack of understanding of the blessings that come from putting God first and paying tithing first. And without fail, God came through, and as the scriptures say, the windows of heaven opened up and
Yeah.
things were provided. And so I remember those hard discussions. And so when we make those decisions as a lawmaker on, do we raise it, do we cut it, I'm always thinking about the the struggling family that I grew up in, and the immigrant families that who
Yeah.
are making those decisions. This is not between, am I going to get, this clothing or that clothing or these cool shoes that are out for my kids or not. It's, can we pay our rent or not? And I think
Yeah.
that really instills in you, hey, you've got to be fiscally responsible with other people's money, because they might be down to their last dollar. And if you can somehow make it better for them, let's do it. And if you have to increase it, you better make sure you can justify, this is for the betterment of Utah, and justify the increase in the tax.
Right. Thank you for being open and honest about that, Doug. It's the immigrant story for us, isn't it? It's what many Polynesians have gone through, coming from the islands, and the the details, of course, are very different from household to household. But it's kind of what we all went through, whether it was the 70s, 80s, or 90s. There's a lot of us who have gone through that. I recall in my own situation where our parents said the same exact thing. Hey, we're not going to have hot water this month. So thank goodness it's July and we'll still be warm. You won't freeze to death, but we got to get through this month before we can have the money to sustain us for the next month. So I think that is a testament, in my mind, of where you come from is definitely where you're going to, and maybe you can walk me through the process how you think through. Is there a bill that was recently passed that you worked on where you did have to go back to previous experiences to say, this is why I'm passionate about this bill?
Yeah, one that I passed this last session that kind of hits home is, there was one around foster kids. Um, I've had a foster kid in my home since I was maybe 11 or 12. And um, my sister has adopted one of her foster kids, and now he's one of my nephews. And him and his daughter come on vacations with us. It's no different than any of my other nieces and nephews. Um, we still have foster kids in my family. My sister has a foster kid, and so it was very normal. And I think that's also something that's maybe um, unique about Polynesians, is they care for people, they help other people, they love, uh, and so that comes very naturally. If we see someone who needs, they want to give. And so I started looking into kind of our foster care system in Utah, and realized that those who are in foster care who've lost both of their parents, they should be receiving what's called Social Security survivor benefits.
Mm.
Now, federal law allows the state of Utah and other states to take this money and use it to offset the costs of the general foster care program. I thought that was just completely wrong, and it just didn't seem right that we were taking the kids who lost their parents, no backup plan, and we were taking that money and using it for general budgets. And
Yeah,
these are kids who will then go out into the system when they're 18
with
without
absolutely nothing.
nobody to help them, no one to be a mentor, um,
Wow.
just no financial support. And so my bill was to take this money, to put it aside in a fund, and when they age out of foster care at the age of 18, this money could go towards stable housing. It could go to transportation. It could go to paying for education if they wanted to go to a tech school or college. And this really is a launching pad for them in the rest of their life,
Yeah.
uh, where they have nothing. The least we could do is actually give them back what is theirs when they turn 18, and really they can jumpstart their life with, some of these kids will have anywhere from 25 to $40,000 to start
Wow.
their life. And you think about what they can do with that. I think there's real potential, and so that was one thing that I drew back on is, I could only feel for those who are in tough situations where their parents have to give them up, or they've,
Yeah.
maybe lost both of their parents, and, thinking about how can I support this population who I think is maybe the most vulnerable in our population here.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that was one small change, that affected a lot of people. From last year, there was 464 kids who'd lost both parents who were in the system, and the state of Utah took $1.2 million dollars from these kids. It's an average of
Wow.
$5,000 per kid, and so in the grand scheme of things, Utah's budget, who's $30 billion, that's a rounding error,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
but if you think about the impact that can have on these 464 kids, that's life-changing, and so, like I said, "Look, we can figure out how we get that $1.2 million elsewhere. Let's do the
Yeah.
right thing and give them their money. That's theirs. This seems wrong." It seems like, and the phrase I used was, "Seems like we're stealing candy from a baby," and
Yeah.
that's what it was. We were taking money from the
Right.
most vulnerable who had no say, and we were taking it and using it for other things when it should be used for their future success. And now I'm happy to say that that law was passed. It was signed into law, and that money will go to those kids when they age out of care. And so
Yeah.
that's one law that I passed that kind of brought passion based off of some of my early experiences as a kid and as a young adult.
That's beautiful. And it's one of those situations as I'm listening to you say it, because we're just not aware of the details in a lot of these things that are passed. And you've outlined it beautifully, but it's one of those situations. Every situation is different, but it's almost like us re-abusing or re-traumatizing kids who are already going through or have gone through trauma. So kudos. That's a beautiful blessing for them and probably a blessing for you to have the opportunity to help them out in that way.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's the cool thing about the position I'm in, and people ask, like, what's the best thing about it? And it's really the opportunity to make an impact that will change lives.
Yeah.
And that's that's what I love about it, is really having a seat at the table and being able to look at things from a different perspective and say, hey, we should be doing more of this, or hey, we should stop doing this. And just having a different perspective than, um, maybe others who've been in the position in the past.
Yeah. When we talked briefly earlier, you're one of three who were elected to public office this go around. First of all, what kind of trauma did you experience during the campaign, and how are you working, or are you working with Jake Fitzimanu and Verona Maunga to help not just our Polynesian people, but people in general, the Polynesian way?
Yeah. I think it's amazing to have 3 Polynesians up there, and I
Yeah.
think although we sit on the opposite side of the aisle, um, the funny thing I've said before is, when we talk about isles to Polynesians, we're talking about the isles of the sea. We're all
Yeah.
islands together.
Right.
This is not political isles, and
Yeah.
I truly believe that, that Verona, Jake, and I, we have the opportunity to lead out on some of Utah's biggest problems and bring people together. I think that's one thing that's unique about Polynesians is we're able to bring people together and bring sides that maybe, on a usual day would be arguing and fighting and disagreeing,
Yeah.
uh, but that we can come together and disagree, but still leave with respect and love because we know where it comes from. And that's one thing that I appreciate about both of them is we vote different, we see things differently, but at the end of the day, there's still love and respect there. And
Yeah.
we go to lunch regularly, we talk regularly, because we realize that there's a real opportunity for us to not only represent our districts, but represent Polynesians as a whole. And
Yeah.
if we look at all the bills, there was about 600 bills that were passed this last session.
Wow.
85 to 90% are bipartisan. And so there is a large majority that we all agree on. There's a small percentage that we actually kind of vote party lines. And so some of the biggest problems I think we can solve together. It's not really Republican or Democrat. It's really, hey, we've just got to find the best solution for Utah, and
Yeah.
I think that's what we have the opportunity to do. I think as far as representing Polynesians as a whole, man, I hope that what we're doing, being up there, is inspiring to the young kid who wants
Yeah.
to be in politics or just wants to do something different. It doesn't have to be politics, but I hope they see us and say, "Man, I've never thought about that." And what I want to do, I want to be an artist. I want to be a dancer. I want to be a whatever it is. And it's something
Yeah.
that's different from what they see other Polynesians doing, and having the inspiration and kind of the drive to say, yeah, I can do something different because I've seen other Polynesians do things that are different.
Yeah. Yeah. And tell me that is a when you put it as aisles versus aisles, sometimes it feels like, to me at least, when we've been in certain situations, whether it's a leadership position or we're doing something in the community, it it seems to me like, as a Polynesian, as a Pacific Islander, we that's kind of our superpower, is the ability to bring people, help bridge gaps between different types of people, even if a person had different party affiliations or was just raised differently, financial difference between the two. That just, I don't know how you feel about that, but it just seems to be our superpower as Polynesians, the warmth and the openness to just say, "Yeah, we disagree on this, but we can still love each other." What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly that it is definitely a superpower, and I can't put my finger on what and why. All I can say is I think the way we lead with our heart, and we're
Yeah,
open and honest and genuine and vulnerable. Um, I think that that breaks down barriers of, oh, I have to act a certain way. I have to just be professional. I just have to show what I want people to see. I think when I come across Polynesians, I just kind of drop those barriers, and we're brothers and sisters. And I think when people see that, they also drop their barriers and their guards up from, oh, I'm playing a game and I can only show what cards I want you to see, to, you know what, I'm gonna lay down all my cards so you can see it because you've shown me your
yeah,
full heart. And so I think if we could continue to lead like that, as at least us three in the state legislature, I think we'll continue to break down these walls and barriers of, you know, the typical political arguments. And I love it. I'm already seeing that. I mean, we had our swearing in ceremony, and
yeah.
um you had lays there, and I don't think they've ever had lays, there, and people are like, "Wow, this is beautiful," and you had people cheering in the crowd when they announced her name,
Right.
like a graduation, and
Yeah.
I don't think that type of cheering has ever happened in the state capitol before, and people are like, "Man, that's so cool," like, I've never been like, I always thought it was important that we're getting sworn in, but I've never seen, like, that type of excitement and support and love from
Yeah.
community to
Yeah.
see that. And man, it's already starting to bring and change the culture of the legislature by having Polynesians in there, and bringing, Hawaiians might call the spirit of aloha.
Yeah.
The there's many variations of that within the Polynesian cultures, but there's just a different spirit about having us three up there just because of the cultures that we come from and the heritage we bring.
Yeah. Amazing. That's it's a learning experience for me to hear those types of things, because I've never been in those situations. Many of us, none of us have. You are, the three of you, and of course there are people throughout the United States and other states that are also, kind of, paving the way for others like us to be a part of, whether it's government or some type of community or civic organization that helps people out. But um, what about your campaign? What were the difficulties that you encountered there, and what did you learn from going through that whole campaign run?
Yeah. The campaign was very, very interesting because I came out as an outsider. I
Yeah,
haven't been in politics. Um, there's a little bit of an expectation in Utah politics that you kind of work your way up, right? You start
Yeah.
as a certain level of like volunteering and you learn the system, you learn the party rules and everything. And then at a certain point, you serve in volunteer positions that you're elected by your peers. And then when it comes to the time you kind of groomed to be, oh, well, you're going to be the next state representative or your city council member or mayor or,
Yeah.
whatever it might be. And so
Earn your
coming out,
stripes.
yeah, so coming as an outsider, it was interesting because people would ask two questions and I knew the difference between the questions, although they may sound like the same question. The question is, um, why are you running? And then you go through your question like, oh, well, these are the things I want to accomplish. This is, and then the second question is, but why are you running? And right, the question really is, who do you think you are?
Yeah.
What's special about you that you think you can
Yeah.
represent us? And that was a little bit interesting because I hadn't been in politics for a long time. I hadn't earned my stripes, and I had to overcome that to show credibility and understanding of
Yeah.
government and come up with policies that I would focus on that my district and my area, the three cities that I would represent, care about. And so that was interesting. The other interesting part was um, being in the public light where now people are attacking, right? People have
Yeah.
opinions on my opinions. And
Yep.
at first that was a little uncomfortable. But I knew getting into it, that's what I was signing up for. It's
Yeah.
just different when you know it's coming, but then it hits you and you're like, oh, okay.
I wasn't prepared for that.
Yeah, I thought I was prepared. I was not
Yeah.
prepared for that. And that's been an interesting kind of um, experience to constantly be going through.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what I realize is that I decided early on during my campaign and even now that I would be transparent. And my goal really is to be the most transparent public official or elected official in Utah. That comes with allowing people to have a say on everything you're doing. And people have. If you go on my
Yeah.
page, people that just, even the things that you would think, there's no way people could disagree with this. Oh, there's people who disagree.
Yeah.
um, so that's been interesting, but it's also been motivating because I realize that I can't always make everyone happy.
Right.
Even though there's people who are more loud on one side, um, I, I I'm grateful that some people go out of their way to thank me for the things that I am doing. Um, and I think one thing I also appreciate is my wife Jocelyn does not have social media, and so she doesn't see anything.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
that's good.
that would be really, really tough is if she started getting affected by it. Um,
Yeah.
she just like sees me and she's like, "What's going on?" And sometimes I'll tell her, and sometimes I'm like, what, it's not that big of a deal. I'll just ignore it. We'll move on. But that's been the interesting thing about the campaign. But man, I also, one of the most humbling things was so many Polynesians came out. I mean,
Good.
they came out to volunteer, they came to knock doors, they came to buy plates, and they came to all of my fundraisers. They came, man, they just came out everything, every event. We had a huge pickleball tournament. We had,
Yeah.
I mean, we just, everything that we did, it was just so cool to see Polynesians come out and be proud. Like it was very, very humbling to see that Polynesians from everywhere, not even just from Utah, but from Idaho, from California, from Hawaii, like
Yeah.
people were coming out just to support it because they heard a Tongan guy is running in Utah and they'd maybe seen a video and they're like, "Hey, let's go support." And so, man, I'm just incredibly grateful for so many people who either donated their time, their talents, or even their hard-earned dollars to help support the campaign.
Yeah, that's impressive. Especially considering and many who live here in the state of Utah will know this. even people outside of the state of Utah know this, that it's still predominantly a Palangi culture. The demographic is heavily Palangi. So when you talk about being the outsider, you were the outsider in many different ways. So the fact that you were able to pull through and be elected was phenomenal, considering the odds that were against you. Not just in that political sphere that you just explained, but also the fact that the voters here in Utah are predominantly Palangi, Caucasian.
Mhm.
So that's why I thought, man, this is impressive that these people won, and I just well maybe an additional question to that is you mentioned your wife Jocelyn. Uh, what additional roles has she taken on since you've been elected?
She's basically been a single mom.
Yeah, I figured as much.
I mean, it's man, I say that jokingly, but I also say it seriously.
Yeah,
The 45-day session, which is the busiest time, that's the legislative session. It's from
yeah,
January to March. We are up on the hill, and I mean, we're working full days. Like, I think the shortest day I worked is 12 hours, maybe. And the
yeah,
longest day is, I mean, 20 plus, and just kind
yeah,
of like take a nap, wake up and shower, get ready, and just get up for the I've slept at the Capitol. I've done that already within my first session. And so I'm so grateful that Jocelyn has held down the fort. Um
yeah,
and hasn't complained. And that was one thing that we had that important discussion early on before we
yeah,
physically signed the paper and said yes, we're in. Is I talked to her and said, "Look, we're either 110% in or we're 110% out, and this is not more important than our family and our
yeah,
relationship as husband and
yeah,
wife." And, we took time to pray and fast and go to the temple and see if it was right for us. And after I gave her time to do it, didn't find her own answer, she came back and said, "Okay, I'm in." And she's been in since that day, and it's been, over a year now from the campaigning to, actually being in office. And has there been recalibration? Absolutely. We've had to
yeah,
recalibrate and say, "Hey, I know you're busy, but I need this from you." And so we have, there's things that we've done in our calendar where some activities and events that we have to attend, some are mandatory. And I'm just like, we just have to be here, and we have to clear our schedule, and we have to find babysitters and work that out. And then some are optional, and you can come. Most of those are fun, and the kids will love it, or you'll love it. Um, but there's got to be give and take, and there's some things that I
yeah,
just have to be at, and I would love for you to be at. And there's other things that'll be optional. And so we just communicate. And sometimes it's like, I had a hard day, and I take some time off, and I'm just home more during those tough times, and I drop off the kids when I need to, or pick them up, or do homework at night. And so it's definitely a team effort. This position, my name is on the door and on the desk, but it's definitely not. If I could put her name up there too, this is just as much her as it is me. And grateful for her love and support through it all.
fantastic. Yeah, I think that was the reason why I mentioned it and asked the question because we don't often see what's happening behind closed doors. We see you and Jocelyn in public. She's smiling, she's enjoying the moment. But at the end of the day, she's the one running the household and every other thing that doesn't have to do with politics. And I think that's one of the things when I see uh, people attack the spouses of public officials, I think, man, that's just there's no word for it because the only skin in the game is that they're supporting you in your job, and they're doing the best that they can. But to attack someone's loved one, um, to attack you by attacking your loved one is just one of the dirtiest tricks in the book. So
Yeah.
kudos to her. All props to her. I know she's doing a fantastic job because I see your beautiful children yeah, online and social media, and you guys are doing. And maybe we can segue quickly to this. you mentioned your faith and going to the temple and things like that. Has How has your testimony grown, or have there been deterrents in growing your faith as you served in this public office, or you serve in this public office?
It's definitely grown, because I feel like outside of relying on Jocelyn to help hold everything together and be the glue for our entire life, there's been a huge reliance on God and
Yeah,
to give me the energy to give me the capacity to fight for the things that I'm passionate about, that I feel that are right. Um, it's an incredibly hard job. I think people see from the outside and they may see on the news and the flashy things like, oh, you did this for yourself. But man, it can be incredibly lonely.
yeah,
And it can be hard because you work, and me, I only worked months on some of these bills, but people work years on these bills. And it almost feels like it's part of you.
yeah.
And when it gets attacked, it's
You take it
almost
personal.
attacking you. Yeah. Because you're like,
Yeah,
man, I've worked 8, 9 months, 10 months, a year. In my case, it was just a few months, but when people attacked my ideas and they say, "Oh, this is the most terrible idea that I've ever heard of," that hurts, right? Because it's man, you're like they're basically calling you dumb. Like,
yeah,
"Who came up with this idea?" It's like, "Oh, that was me." Um, and it's very lonely at times, and
yeah,
there's so much preparation and reading that you have to do. You have to understand it. Man, it feels like I was back in college, but more so grad school, where I just was drinking from a fire hose. I was expected to understand everything and to show up and speak eloquently about things that I just learned about the night before. And there's no way I could have done that without God's help helping me remember, one of the thousands of over 1,000 bills that I read. And
yeah,
people are like people who come up and watch the whole thing happen, they'll see how many bills we're going through, that we're reading, discussing, and someone will come up to me while I'm next to a family member or friend, and they'll say, "Hey, where are you at on this bill?" And they'll give me a number, and I'm like, "I can't remember the number. Tell me about it." And once they start discussing, it'll just come back, and I'll remember what the bill is about. And I'm like, "Okay, yes, I'm good. I'm good on this. You have my vote." And someone they'll just say, like, "How do you remember all of these bills? They're also very different. They're on so many
yeah,
different things, and yet you've read them maybe once, twice if you're lucky, and you already understand it. You're understanding the nuance of it, the for and against it." And
yeah,
honestly, I know I'm not that smart to understand it, and it's without God's like, with God's help, it has been just time after time I'm able to remember things, and I'm able to vote my conscience because I can read, digest it, and he brings it back to my remembrance of, "Hey, this is what you studied, even though it was at 3 o'clock last night and you were falling in between the bill.
right.
This is what the bill was about." And I can't say enough that without God, I could not do this.
Yeah,
Not do it justice for sure.
yeah. It's kind of like being asked to teach Elders Quorum on Saturday, and it's Sunday at 10 o'clock at night. You haven't had that experience
Right?
before, huh?
Probably more than it's regular. Might as well just read the lesson and prepare.
Exactly. Hey, you read the scripture. No, well, I mean, it's also funny, and I thought you were headed this direction. I'm grateful for your answer there, because it's also funny that many people hear the bills, but they don't see what the entire body of work that it took to even get it to be discussed in the sessions. So, um, yeah, I don't. Somebody must be praying for you, Doug, for you to have that opportunity. I know you're a smart guy, but man, to have the ability to recall the blessing and the spirit of recollection, I think someone is saying a lot of prayers on your behalf. including Jocelyn, your parents, and every Polynesian, everybody who voted for you, basically.
Yeah, I am not smart enough. I don't have a great memory as is, and the older I get, the worse it's getting. But for some reason, when we
I know
talk
you,
about
brother.
bills and someone brings up a bill, I can just it just comes back. And I used to think that that was the most amazing thing watching legislators as I was
Yeah.
preparing for it. And now being in the seat, I realize, oh, God isn't just letting us run government on our own. He's very
Yeah.
much involved in the workings of government, and
Right.
he's helping individuals do what's right, and especially if we're asking for his help.
Yeah.
And there's many, many nights I prayed on certain bills that were controversial and certain bills that I didn't know where I was. And at least by the time that we voted, I knew where I was going to vote based off of how I felt, my principles, and after, dissecting the bill and understanding it.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, it's been, we've had several pretty heated debates and really hot political seasons um, on a federal level, even on a state level. What do you think is, for you personally, has been the hottest political issue that you've had to deal with?
I'm going to answer this by saying two things. I'll just stick to state issues because federal issues, they're tough because they come at us and yell at us, and this has happened. And it's like, oh, you got to call our federal delegation, you got to call our U.S. senators and U.S.
Yeah.
congressmen and women. This is not us. But the two that I think have been the biggest issues of topic and kind of controversial, which I've actually spoke out on both. Um, One was the labor unions bill, the public labor unions, and then the second was the transgender bill that came out, which just added more clarification on the definitions and uh, basically adding separation and making sure that public institutions and public schools had clear definitions from government so that they're not in trouble of potentially being sued because they're like, well, the law says this and you guys did your
Yeah.
own thing. And so we just clarified
Right.
the law. And I think there's been a lot of misunderstanding about that law. If
Yeah.
if people read the law and read the actual bill, I think they would see that it was very empathetic and sympathetic for those who are transgender.
Yeah.
Um, there could have been a lot of different ways if we were looking at being punitive that we could have done that. And
Yeah.
in a state that is a supermajority Republican and conservative who tend to view things uh, differently than those of our transgender community, it could have passed a different way. But one thing I respected and really appreciated about the bill sponsor, she spoke to the transgender community and said, "Look, how can we come to a compromise? How can we
Yeah.
get to a place where we both may not fully agree with where we're at, but we're at a place that we can both live with?" And
Right.
I think there was a lot of compromise that obviously the media didn't listen to or didn't care for. They just wanted
Yeah.
the headline, and there was a lot of other activists who didn't care for what the compromise was. If they didn't get 100% of the what they wanted, it was not a good bill. And
Yeah.
um, I think there was, yeah, I think we did the best for everyone, given the circumstances. And happy to dive into details if you want more details of either of those bills. But it's when you're dealing with people, it's always hard, and you're gonna hurt people's
Yeah.
feelings. And
Yeah.
I don't think that's the intention, but you're trying to do what's right for what you believe is right, and also what the role of government is, and when we should step in and when we shouldn't.
Yeah. Because you still have your freedoms, don't you? You still have your agency. And I think that carries over into any relationship in my mind. There's going to be some compromise even between you and Jocelyn, me and Jen. There's some things that we disagree on as husband and wife, but what we really want to come to is an agreement that because we love each other, we need to make this work for both of us. So it's going to take some compromise. And I
Yeah.
think sometimes we lose that in the spirit of politics because we want to dig our heels in and say, hey, this is the line, and I'm going to toe the line. Yeah, and so kudos to the person who sponsored the bill because it takes a lot of diplomacy, doesn't it?
It does. And let me just tell specifically the compromise that came, because
Yeah.
I think I'm dancing around what actually happened.
Yeah.
So essentially, what happened was at one of our universities here in Utah. Um, there was a case where we had a transgender RA, resident assistant, who had access to dorms, bathrooms, etc. That a lot of people were uncomfortable, and I also believe that there was also a transgender and individual who was assigned to a room with a girl, and that kind of blew things up too. They were not happy
Yeah.
with that. Because of that, the when we looked at the law, it wasn't clear on what the universities could do. And
Yeah.
so essentially what we had to write into code, into law, was what happens? What's the right thing to do before we get to these problems? And
Yeah.
the the one-sided thing that we could have done as being having a supermajority is just saying, you just go to the
Zero
dorms with
tolerance.
biological sex. That's it.
Yeah.
End of story. What we ended up doing was, that's the baseline. You go to the dorm of your biological sex, but if you don't feel comfortable in that in those dorms, we required the university to set aside special accommodations for you, that you could go and you can stay and feel comfortable. The plus side of that is no one ever has to feel uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
Your parents and you might have discussions with the person you're signing up with housing, but you're never going to be in a situation where someone says, "Oh, I can't believe you put me with this person,"
Yeah.
vice versa, right? And
Right.
and so I think it really leveled the playing field, that parents knew that their kids were safe regardless of where they were housed.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, no kid would ever have to go into a dorm room where they were looked at differently or judged differently because they were at a good place. And so when you hear what was written about the bill, and you see the headlines, and you see kind of the uproar about it, you're like, "Oh, that's not what I understand." But when I actually told people who disagreed with me, I told them this is what the bill did, they were shocked and were like, "Wow, I'm glad we actually talked, because I actually agree with that." And so I think it just goes to show that, you know, the headline isn't everything. Part of
Yeah.
a quote isn't everything. And if you're going to take a stance, you should read the bill and understand it before you kind of come out and attack someone on their stance on a bill too. So
Right.
that I think that was kind of the diplomacy piece of it, the compromise, and I think was reasonable for us to come to that solution. And I think that's where I came from. It was, I'm not only looking out for my daughters and having a place they're comfortable, but I'm looking
Yeah.
out for
Yeah.
everyone. And
Right.
that's I had to have that hard conversation with one of my constituents who emailed me crying. And after we had that conversation, she was like, "I'm so sorry that I attacked you. I actually agree wholeheartedly with what you guys did."
Yeah.
And we walked away hugging and saying, "You know what? Like, lesson learned from both of us. Like, I'll read the
Yeah.
bill and understand. I'll come to you first." And second was like, maybe I should do. I can explain more of my
Yeah.
stances so that people know that they don't just read the news and that's what they take from. You know.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And I think maybe you can provide your insight here as well, or maybe even your opinion. I think when you look at media, and we hear this all the time, and we can't place 100% blame on the media, but there are some things that are reported that can easily be taken out of context because of the way they were written or the way that they were said. And I like to think that there is no malice in that, but it's getting harder and harder to believe that because of the way that things are reported. What are your thoughts there?
at the end of the day, they're a business, right? And
Yeah,
the way
that's
that
right.
they stay alive as a business is they have readers, they
Yeah,
have clicks, they have eyes, and they're doing their job. And I don't agree with it a lot of the time,
yeah.
but when you look at them as that, they're a business trying to survive in a digital age. The
You can't be
headline,
mad.
they've
Yeah,
they've got to get a headline that's clickable,
yeah,
right? Because
yeah,
in my foster care bill, that I discussed earlier, I had reached out to every media outlet to see if someone would cover it. I'm like,
yeah,
"This is such a good, like, bill, and everyone can agree on
yeah.
this, and everyone can feel good about
Yeah,
this."
it's a feel good story.
And the kind of the message back was, "Feel good doesn't sell," right? It's like,
Yeah,
we
it
care,
doesn't.
right? Like,
It doesn't.
it may make you feel good, and people, as you tell people, it may make them feel good, but the reality is that this isn't worthy of writing a story on
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it doesn't get people to be mad. It doesn't get people to react. It's just
Right.
like, oh, cool, a feel good story. But I think the nice thing about social media and having my own audience and followers is when I posted that and kind of the ins and outs of my bill, there was a lot of feedback. There was a lot of people who responded and thanked and kind of appreciated the work. And so, although the news won't always write about the good, they very rarely write about the good that we do.
Yeah,
They're always
yeah,
just there to criticize and to
yeah.
find some type of controversy. Um,
Because
I
that's what gets the eyeballs.
yeah, but, like
Yeah,
you said, I'm not mad at them. I realize what they're there for and why they are who, like, what they're doing, and I try to use them as a tool too when there's certain things that I'm trying to do and run. I try to get their audience too, and, "Hey, can you come cover this? Can you come do this?" Because I see them as a tool and not really the source of knowledge. I don't see them as that,
yeah,
and not
yeah,
anymore. Um, and people may disagree with me on that, but they are one source of knowledge, but they aren't the ultimate source of knowledge. And I think we've moved away from that a long time ago. And
yeah,
you know,
yeah. You're absolutely right, and it's I mean, this technical day and age, we have access to so much information. We can form an opinion, and we have to be very careful how we form those opinions. And it really comes down to your information gathering and the source of the information. And I think you and I both know because we're members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Saints that even our prophets have said to be careful uh, what we take as truth. We have to do our research. We have to be informed about things, but be careful where the source of truth comes from, or where your source of information comes from, and what the truth of that information is. And from a gospel perspective, it's easy to know, hey, this is true, and this is skirting the line of true and a falsehood, which is getting the falsehoods are growing and growing with the internet and social media. But as when we live on social media, man, that just becomes, you can easily go down a rabbit hole of information, false information, if you're not careful.
yeah.
So speaking of that, go ahead, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and that's actually one thing that I'm most worried about when it comes to our youth and the next
Yeah,
generation is
yeah,
the amount of time. We're not even only worried about screen time. That was kind of 5 years ago where we were like, screen,
yeah.
like a thing is just like worried about how much
It's too
time you're.
much. Yeah,
Now we're to the point of this is, and I don't want to be an alarmist or be too extreme, but I really think we're to the point where it is almost psychological warfare where the the things that are being shown on social media to our kids, studies show that the amount of violent and inappropriate videos and content that's shown to
yeah,
a kid that signs up for their first social media um, account happens seconds after. And
yeah, yeah,
they are also romanticizing mental health, and
Yeah.
it comes to suicide and harming themselves, um, to the
Or
point where
challenges.
yes, and
Yeah.
not even to the point where it's not just normalizing it, it's almost making it so it's desirable. And
Yes.
so,
Yeah.
we've had a uptick in depression and anxiety. We've had an uptick
Mhm.
in hospitalizations, especially when looking at young girls being
Yeah.
hospitalized based off of depression and anxiety. We've had an uptick in suicides, and um, there hasn't been a lot of people policing social media companies and what the information and how the algorithm is
Yeah.
working to, I don't know, brainwash seems strong, but that's the only word that comes
Yeah.
to our mind is
Yeah.
these companies can control everything, what our kids think, what they do, um, everything to how they consume information, and
Yeah.
it's scary the amount of control and power that these companies have. And I frankly, as a lawmaker, as a dad, I'm worried about the route that we're moving as a society and allowing this to happen and continue to happen right in front of our eyes and not really
Yeah.
doing anything about it.
Yeah, and especially with how overt it is. Um, I remember, I don't know if you were this way, you're a lot younger than me, but back in the uh when I was a junior high kid, uh you had to do a lot of work to get some girl to pay attention to you. N- I don't know if this is true, but this is what I've observed and I've seen. It's the roles have reversed a little bit or have flipped. I shouldn't say reversed, they've flipped, where it's the girl who's more aggressive, in my mind, in many ways, shapes, and forms, as opposed to the males who have kind of taken a step back and been the docile one, for lack of better terms. So when you talk about how we're driven by algorithms created by social media, very overt, and it's like you say, it's very normalized to the point where now influencers, teenagers especially, are the ones who are driving culture, not parents and the people who should be policing us in these on these devices.
It's a scary, scary path we're moving down, and um, you talk about men and women, and I guess boys and girls, and the roles being reversed. We're I don't know how to say it in a nicer way, but we're raising soft men. Like like it's just it's a very different world, and I
Yes.
think we've really got to figure out how to reverse this back and
Yeah.
change this to where the home becomes the place where we're teaching our kids and not
Yeah.
online and on the cell phones.
Yeah.
Uh, we've committed with our at least our family, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you've parented through a digital age because you have kids who are older. Um, I don't think we'll give our kids a phone, at least a smartphone, until they're 16.
Yeah.
Definitely won't have social media until they're 16. And there's some apps that I probably will never allow them to have. And that's tough because, you don't, I think parents give in to, and studies have shown this, parents give in to giving their kids a phone younger because they don't want their kid to be the only one. And even at
Yeah.
my daughter being 11, she's one of the few kids in her classes, in her church classes, in her golf team that doesn't have a phone. And I
Wow.
sense it. I sense it
Yeah.
when, when everyone is talking about, "Oh, we'll text you the details about this activity. We'll text you
Yeah.
about your assignment." She looks at me and she's like, "Oh, dad, see, I told you." Like, I'm
Yeah.
the one that doesn't have the phone, and everyone knows
Yeah.
that.
They have to send me a letter in the mail because I don't have a phone.
It's pigeon mail. They're sending a pigeon to our house.
Yeah.
But you know what the interesting thing about this is? Undoubtedly, there's parents who are there who see this interaction between me and my daughter, and they come and say, "I wish I would have waited longer for my
Yeah.
kids to have a phone." And that just confirms man, I'm glad we've stuck to it. We've stuck to our guns. We haven't given in because the damage has already been done with some of the kids who have these phones, and it's
Yeah.
really, really hard to repair and take that all back once you've already given them the weapon, which is our cell
Right.
phones, to take over their mental health. And especially with young girls, it's even more and more. Um, it's it's worse, the damage that can
Yeah.
be done because of
Yeah.
kind of the things they're introduced with health and diet and weight and the
Yep.
way they should look and the way they should act. And guys have a little bit less of that. There's always a sense of trying to be cool, but there's much more that girls are looking at online versus just
Sure.
how to act, but it's how to look and what weight they should be and what's the newest, fake eyelashes, Botox, and fake lips.
Right.
You name it,
Yeah.
there's always something else that can make them look better and more
Yeah.
appealing. And if they don't have it, they feel left out.
Yeah. And the bullies have changed. This, and going back to your example, we were the same way with our boys. There was a time the justification for us was pretty much the same. In the event of emergencies, there was a shared phone between the older boys. But then when the older boys were leaving the house and it was just down to the younger, and he's a lot younger than the older ones. The justification at that point was, well, he's by himself, so he needs someone to communicate with us. You know,
Yeah.
we, we'll work our way around some of the things that we say we're against, but then we justify um, why we're doing certain things. But I do recall that there were certain things, that certain stipulations within our household, whether it was at night we shut off the Wi-Fi, or we
Mm.
gather all the phones. Nobody sleeps with their phone. We'll give you an alarm clock so that you get up on time. And then serving as a bishop in the YSA ward, um, I would say probably 9 out of 10 people who were struggling with something. It was a result of having been so, I wouldn't say addicted is the right word, but so driven by social media. And I call social media, just like marijuana and things, are gateway drugs to harder drugs. I call social media the gateway to pornography and other harder things. And uh, people who might say, well, that doesn't sound right. Well, sit in the room with 200 plus YSAs and ask that question, and the answer will be consistent. It was because I started using social media at a young age.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
man, I wonder what we do as parents to change this because what's interesting, the dilemma that you said that, parents stand for something, but then they justify it. Maybe it's the youngest kid, or I just want to get in contact with them. One of the bills that we ran this last year and it passed um, was no cell phones during class time. Now, what the original bill wanted to be, in which I agree with, was opening bell to closing bell, no phones. And
Yeah.
that's hard because,
It is.
because you're so attached. Not only the kids have the hardest time, but also the hardest fighters of this bill against this bill were parents. And their
Yeah.
justification was, what if an emergency happens and I need to get a hold of
Right.
my kid?
Right.
Well, most of us grew up in a time where there was a period of time where you didn't have a cell phone in
Yes.
school, and
Believe it or not.
your parents figured out how to get you in, get a contact with you if there was an
Yeah.
emergency.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, the last thing that you want happening if there's an emergency in school is your kid not listening to someone in authority and being on their phone calling you
Yeah.
while there's
Yeah.
a fire, while there's a active shooter.
Yep.
You need everyone to be listening to instructions to make sure that everyone is safe and no one is harmed. And yet, because of that, we have kids not listening and on their phones. And I just taught 2 days ago on Monday. I taught for the first time. I substitute taught, and I did that solely so that I could be in the shoes of a teacher. I'm passing laws for teachers. I'm passing laws
Yeah.
for students in education. I just wanted to learn and
Yeah.
see kind of what they go through and really understand. It's been a long time since I've been in a middle school or high school classroom.
Yeah. Doing your
And
due diligence.
the amount of difficulty it is to keep these kids' attention and engagement. I told them about this bill because I said, "What feedback do you have for me as a legislator?" And they're like, "Oh, get rid of the phone bill, the ban. It's terrible. We need our phone." And I said, "You know, the crazy thing is, it is so hard to keep your attention without your phones. I couldn't imagine if you had your phones out right now, how much harder it would be."
Yeah.
And, I had to give instructions, simple instructions on an assignment that was really just a freebie assignment because the teacher knew a sub was coming.
Yeah.
Tens, if not more than 30 times every class period because they were not listening. And
Yeah.
I understood what I was fine. I was there to explain it, but I was just, "Oh, I don't know what's going on." I'm like, "I just explained it to the person next to you."
Yeah.
And I just didn't explain it like it's so what I'm aiming at is we've got to do something as parents. Parents are fighting back on this to take back control and to kind of help us out. I don't know what we do as parents, and I've thought many times, man, I'm gonna just start a movement with parents,
Yeah.
and we're going to just decide we're not gonna give our kids smartphones up until this age. We're not gonna allow our kids social media, and just start. It could just be our small neighborhood or our community, and I
Yeah.
just think
Yeah.
it kind of
Or
can
go
grow.
through the school board.
Yeah, I don't know what we can do to help parents. I don't know if you have any thoughts on how do we help our parents with kids who are growing up in a digital age?
Yeah.
Having been through it, you've been through it, but also you've seen the damages from a bishop's perspective.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on how we do that for young parents like me? How do we fix this?
Yeah, unfortunately, um, I can't to me, I can't place too much blame on a child. Yeah, I know I understand that we need to treat them as young adults and they're still growing and learning, but this may be a bit of a cop out, but I think we need to work with parents more to help them understand what's happening in schools and let them know how difficult it is to retain good teachers because your kids are just disrespectful and they're not listening and they're not engaged in their education. I don't know, and I mean this. So many of the things that's why I'm glad I'm not you because there's so many layers of these things that you have to peel back before you say, oh, that's the root of the problem. But even that might be just a portion of the actual issue because you're going to uncover more from that. But I just think if we have places where parents who are really interested in making changes for their kids, not just saying, well, I'll just throw $50 at it to fix the problem, or
Mhm.
I'll just buy them a better phone to fix the problem. I don't know. It's just, I think many parents today and people even in my generation is probably where it started, where we think that we're empowering kids by giving them certain things, but really we're enabling them to do the wrong thing. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I agree. Like man, I think of it as like you put a kid in a candy store and you tell him not to touch anything, or
Yeah.
you know, you're like, "Oh, here, you can have one candy, but don't
Yeah,
touch anything else," right? And you give them that taste, and it's just like, "Oh,
it's over. Yeah,
yeah,
I gotta have all of it.
yeah." And I
Yeah.
think we've gotta just, we want to give our kids candy, we want to reward them, we wanna give them a phone,
Right.
but once you introduce them into that dopamine that hits
Yep.
different, right? It hits the same way a drug does, it hits the same way that sugar does. It's hard to ever go back. And you talk
Yeah.
about addictions that our youth have. We've given them the addiction and expected them to
Yes.
control.
Yep.
Another thing that you said that was interesting, that as we sometimes we don't know where to put blame, and we don't know what the actual problem is. One of the best books, and I think every parent in with kids period, even old or young, I think it's helpful book, is The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt.
Ah, yeah, yeah. I've
Powerful
heard
book.
of that, I haven't read it.
It's such a great book, and he does a great job of not assuming it's social media before doing all of the
Yeah.
research.
Yep.
He tries to look at, every other reason it could be that our kids are now more anxious, they're more depressed, they have more mental health issues. And it's recent, so he's looking at COVID, he compares Western countries versus third world countries, and he just does a good job of not jumping to the conclusion, but letting the data prove it. And man, once he starts diving into, okay, now we've figured out what it is, and
Yeah.
he offers solutions, he offers just like, a lot of data telling us what's been wrong and why it is the way it is. It's a powerful book. While we're sitting here, I've like gotten impressions. I've earlier I said I was gonna do it. I need to just do it, and maybe I need to do that's the spirit telling me to do it today. I want to do a book club with this book
Yeah.
and have parents, and it can be throughout the state. Maybe it's virtual so that anyone can join and any parent who wants to read it. And then maybe that's the start of like parents just becoming more aware. And maybe it's just my inner circle or my,
Yeah.
people who follow me. It could be 10 parents, it could be 100 parents. I don't know what it's going to be, but we come together and say, how do we start changing this for our kids? How do we start changing the environment? What are things that we're committing as parents to stop this from continuing to happen? And
Yeah.
I'm in the role of government where I've taken one of my bills were really to cut at this. We it attacked and declared war against big tech, which I think it's moving in the right direction. But again, my role as a dad is first, right? Like
Yeah.
I should
That
learn
supersedes them all.
my problems at home. And
Yeah.
so if we can as parents, one, be informed and kind of read these type of books and know what's going on, but two, actually take action in doing things in our home to stop this. I mean, I think the world changes first in the home. And that's what I think everything that I'm trying to do as a legislator is strengthen the home, empower parents, give power back to them, because they are the people who know the most about their kids, so they should be making decisions. It shouldn't be
That's right.
government. And more and more we've seen government come to even the doorstep of our homes, and I think that that's wrong. I think parents should be making the decisions for their
Yeah.
family, for their kids. And so anyways, that I think this has inspired me that I need to start a book club and get parents to read more of this and figure out a way that we can all join together and uh,
Yeah.
make a difference.
Yeah. Well, the spirit is confirmed, so let me know and I'll join too. I'd
Awesome.
love to. I'm a big book reader. I love reading. I'm actually reading right now, The Parasitic Mind,
Hmm.
Gad Sad, and it's very, when you talk about we're raising a generation of soft men, he really breaks down the reasons why we've come to this conclusion,
Hmm.
and ways that we can kind of do a reset on that as well. So maybe one of your book recommendations there.
Love it. Yeah, I will definitely add that to the book list for sure. That's awesome.
Great. Doug, it's been a wonderful conversation. A lot of good things. We didn't even touch on half of the things that I wanted to talk about. But if you wouldn't mind, share as a parting thought, if you would just share um, some highlights from your faith journey, and yes, might be putting you on the spot here because I know this is something that's tender to your heart, is the loss of your brother recently. Um, how that has affected your faith, how you're able to maintain your discipleship, with at the same time having to live in a world but not of the world, as the scriptures teach us. I'd love to close with that thought, and maybe if you could, we could set aside some more time to have another session together.
Absolutely. I'd love that. And it would be an honor to jump on again and have another discussion. The first thing that came to mind was a lesson from a seminary teacher, actually. It was a good friend of mine. Um, he spoke and has taught me about the wilderness in
Yeah.
the first 5 books of the Book of Mormon. Nephi talks a lot about the wilderness, going in the wilderness, around the wilderness,
Yeah.
along the Red Sea, um, and kind of the role of the wilderness. And when you look at the New Testament, you see John the Baptist go to the wilderness often to commune with God. You also see Christ himself go to the wilderness and separate himself from the people and go and speak with God there too. Um, the book of Numbers in the Old Testament, um, it the Hebrew people don't name their books the same as ours. So the way they name and title their books of scripture is actually by the first word or the first few words. Well, when you look at the book of Numbers, which is really talking about the children of Israel and their journey through the wilderness and God preparing them to receive the blessings of the promised land. Um, the first few words or the first word is, if I'm saying it wrong, I apologize to anyone who speaks Hebrew, but it's midbar, which is wilderness. Um, Now, a very similar word is medabar, and if you take out the vowels, which is in Hebrew, they don't use vowels. It's the same word, and medabar is to speak. And this analogy that I've been taught by my seminary teacher and good friend is that God uses the wilderness to speak to his people. And um, when I went through the death of my brother, that is definitely one of the wilderness moments in my life, probably one
Yeah.
of the hardest years. I had a nephew who was diagnosed with cancer, my sister who was also diagnosed with cancer, and almost us as a family preparing for them to die at some point, and preparing emotionally, spiritually, even financially to make sure things are in order. And then out of nowhere, my brother gets in a car accident and passes
Yeah.
away that we were just not prepared for. And there was about a year after that that it was a very dark place for me. And not because I lacked faith in the plan of salvation, but it just was the pain and suffering that I had to go through.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and that was definitely a wilderness moment in my life. Um, do we hate the wilderness? Yeah, because it's hard. And
Yeah.
would rather be on a
Right.
beach somewhere sitting next to the ocean,
Yeah.
enchilada. But there's something beautiful about those wilderness times because it's the times where we learn to speak with God.
Yeah.
And I think the other piece of that is being in that wilderness of my brother passing away. It was the moments that I felt closest to God because I knew He was carrying me when I couldn't physically on my own or even mentally,
Yeah.
emotionally. Still had to show up to work. I still had to show up to my calling. Still had to show up as husband and dad. And yet I went through days and I don't even remember them because I almost wasn't there. And I know that that was God carrying me through those wilderness
Yeah.
moments. And so that's my testimony is that God lives, he loves us in our deepest and darkest and wilderness moments of our lives. He's there with us and he's speaking to us. And I think my testimony now is anytime I go through now a wilderness moment, or maybe even someone is sharing a wilderness moment with me, my question to myself or to them is, what is God trying to tell you?
Yeah. Yeah.
What is he trying to message to you? And those have been the biggest learnings of my life, and uh, the biggest spiritual moments is when I'm able to get that message from him. What does he need me to learn through this experience? Why is this happening to me? And what is he trying to talk to me and tell me at this time? And um, usually it's something as simple as he loves me and he's there for me, and he knows that this is hard, but that I'm gonna be okay. And grateful for him and his love. I know his atonement is real, and grateful for it because I am far from perfect. But through it, I continue to get the strength and the energy that I need to carry out my duties as a father and as a husband.
Beautiful. Amen to everything, brother. It's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for organizing your time to make this happen. And you're absolutely right. It's those wilderness moments in life that really help to refine us as people and even define us spiritually, mentally, physically, in every way possible. It's those, we hardly ever learn anything when we're on the beach in a comfortable seat. When you're sitting in a place of comfort, it's hard to learn anything. But when you've been stripped away of all those comforts, that's the moment when you realize that God is trying to teach us something. So thank you for that reminder. Thank you for all of the things that you've shared today, Doug. I look forward to our next conversation. To everybody else who's listening in, please comment, like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. I'll leave details. If you're a if you're in Utah, Doug's district, I should say, and want to get in touch with him for whatever um, difficulties you're going through that might require some of his help, you can find his details down in the details section of this session. Well, thank you again, Doug. My love to your beautiful wife and your beautiful children. I look forward to the next conversation. And until then, a reminder once again as I close uh, this episode that all things are possible through our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. I love you all. We'll see you on the next one.